Cold War zombie. Russia resurrects its 28,000-ton nuclear battlecruiser. Russia has done it again. After 28 years stuck in dry dock, Moscow has rolled out a relic from the Cold War Museum, slapped on some fresh paint, and declared it a game changer. Meet the Admiral Nakhimov, a 28,000-ton Kirov-class nuclear battlecruiser that just waddled back into the White Sea for sea trials. On paper, it's terrifying. In reality, it's a floating Cold War zombie held together by vodka, duct tape, and the misplaced optimism of Russian state media. Hey friends, Wes here, multi-branch veteran, law grad, and bad Russian speaker because mudro izuchat protivnika. Now, let's give credit where credit is due. If you believe Russian press releases, the Nakhimov is Poseidon's personal war chariot. 80 cruise missiles, including Kalibrs for land attack and Zircons that allegedly hit Mach 9 on Tuesdays after vodka. 96 navalized S-400 launch cells, theoretically capable of swatting entire squadrons of fighters, bombers, and even hypersonics out of the sky. 174 vertical launch tubes in total, making an American Ticonderoga cruiser look like it came out of the fun-size Halloween bag. If all that works, and that's a nuclear-sized if, the Nakhimov could function as a floating fortress, defending Arctic skies while launching land attack missiles deep into Europe. Of course, Russia also called the Moskva unsinkable, and we all know how that turned out. In fact, there's a joke. Why does the new Russian Navy have glass-bottomed boats? So they can see the old Russian Navy.
High five. All right.
The Nakhimov isn't your run-of-the-mill gray hunk of steel. At its core, literally, are two nuclear reactors, giving it range and endurance that most navies can only dream about. Where diesel ships chug gas like a frat boy at spring break in Fort Lauderdale, the Nakhimov can theoretically cruise for years without refueling. That kind of range was designed for the Cold War, when the Soviet Navy wanted to shadow U.S. carrier groups and project power across the Arctic. But here's the problem. Running twin nuclear reactors at sea isn't like running a Lada. Even the U.S. Navy, with its gold standard safety culture, decided nuclear-powered cruisers weren't worth the headache back in the 1990s. That's why America stuck with nuclear aircraft carriers and scrapped everything else. Well, except submarines that need to run silent. But in Russia, maintenance culture means painting over rust and hoping nothing explodes. Keeping the Nakhimov's reactors humming safely is like asking a drunk juggler to perform with live chainsaws. And let's not forget the manpower question. Training nuclear-qualified sailors is a long, exacting process. If you've been following Russia's conscription lately, you know the pipeline is clogged with untrained 20-year-olds who can't even operate a toaster without burning themselves. Imagine putting them in charge of a floating Chernobyl. So yes, the Nakhimov's nuclear heart is impressive on paper, but it's also a ticking time bomb strapped to a navy that has trouble getting tugboats to work. Okay, so bragging rights versus reality. Here's Russia's sales pitch. The Nakhimov packs the equivalent of 3 battalions of S-400s into one hull, plus Kalibrs, Oniks, and Zircons for good measure. Sounds scary until you remember Russia's track record. The Admiral Kuznetsov carrier sails with its own tugboat escort every time it goes out because it's so prone to breakdowns. Its black smoke plume looks less like a warship and more like a floating steel mill. The Moskva, supposedly bristling with defenses, didn't notice 2 incoming Ukrainian Neptune missiles before joining the Titanic on the ocean floor. And don't forget the fires, because what's a Russian naval project without an inferno to top things off? So yeah, forgive me if I don't take Moscow's word that this floating zombie suddenly works flawlessly. This harkens to the ghost of mechanical failures past. When Russia says sea trials, what they mean is waiting for the fire to start. The Kuznetsov taught us this tragic comedy well. A dry dock literally sank underneath it, a crane fell onto its flight deck, and the fires, multiple infernos, some killing crew, others costing billions in damage. and that's the ship Russia calls its flagship. The Moskva, for its part, proved that Russian modern radar and air defenses are more like props in a Potemkin village, great for parades, useless against an enemy who knows how to fight. Now, the Nakhimov is supposed to reverse this trend. It's still Soviet-era engineering underneath the facelift. Every valve, every circuit, every well is a potential failure point. With sanctions choking Russian industry and corruption hollowing out supply chains, sourcing parts is like ordering from the Temu version of the defense industry. Add in sailors who are demoralized, underpaid, and barely trained, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Russian naval culture is so toxic that sailors often hide problems rather than fix them. That's how you get nuclear cruisers that double as floating liabilities, even if the ship does float and the reactors don't melt down. There's another problem: the sailors themselves. Russian naval morale is in the gutter. The Black Sea Fleet has been humiliated by Ukrainian drones, jet ski-sized USVs, and even hobbyist-looking Shaheeds. Entire billion-dollar ships have been turned into scrap by weapons that cost less than a Moscow nightclub bar tab. UK intelligence has even suggested that morale among Russian sailors is lower than that among the conscripts being used as trench meat in Ukraine. That's saying something. So sure, the Nakhimov might be the largest surface combatant afloat, but it's crewed by sailors who've watched their fleet get dismantled by a country with no navy. But let's talk about the real elephant in the room: drones and cheap missiles. The war in Ukraine has proven that massive, expensive warships are just oversized targets in an age where $250,000 naval drones can wreck a billion-dollar vessel. Ukraine turned the Moskva into a fish habitat with a pair of homegrown missiles. They've trashed Russian landing ships in Sevastopol with remote-controlled USVs, and they've made saturation attacks an art form. The Nakhimov might bristle with S-400s, but no air defense system is invincible. Saturated with swarms of drones and missiles, and something is going to slip through. And once a missile or drone punches a hole in a nuclear-powered cruiser, the world's containment breach becomes very relevant. A fortress at sea is still just a fortress, and fortresses fall. So here's the bottom line: the Admiral Nakhimov isn't about strategy, it's really symbolism. Moscow wants to remind the world that it's still a superpower, so it dusted off a Cold War relic, filled it with hypersonic buzzwords, and sent it sailing. But reality doesn't care about symbolism. Reality is Ukrainian drones that cost less than a Lada. Reality is sanctions choking spare parts. Reality is a navy whose flagship was sunk by a country with no navy. So yes, Russia has resurrected a Cold War zombie, but just like all zombies, it's slow, it's clumsy, and destined to collapse under its own rot. The Admiral Nakhimov is impressive on paper. Nuclear engines, 174 missile tubes, a scary silhouette cutting across the Arctic. But paper doesn't win wars. Competence does. And Russia's Navy has proven again and again that competence is in short supply. This isn't the future of naval warfare. It's a desperate, radioactive reminder of a past that Russia refuses to let die. If history is any guide, the Nakhimov won't be remembered as a game changer. It'll be remembered the same way we remember the Moskva and the Kuznetsov: overhyped, outdated, and destined to go down in flames. That's it for this quick video today, my friends. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed, YouTube's going to keep serving you up content like this in your feed, but the best free way you can help support this channel is to subscribe. It helps me fight Russian disinformation and keeps Ukraine's fight top of mind for millions of viewers. So consider it. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.